Hello everyone, Anthony here with another episode of The Bloody Point. This is in the category of deep cuts. Today we take a look at the different types of character customization Crowfall has to offer. First up is the passive skill training. This is one area where you have to make some decisions at the very beginning which will affect the outcome of your account's characters. You have three categories: combat, crafting, and exploration. All of these different areas will impact the skills and powers that you have, increasing damage type, resistance type. In some cases, they will even affect what tools or mounts you can equip and equipment that you can put on your character. So this is something that is a big part of your customization and decision you have to make from minute one. You of course want to start your training as soon as you load up your account, and you can only train in two of the three categories at once on any particular account. The different categories here have multiple trees, and those trees open up with further training over time. So for example, you have the range tree here, the weapons tree, which will eventually open up into the range tree and then the great range tree. These trees pertain to different weapons. So you have one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons. You have one-handed ranged weapons, two-handed ranged weapons, and the three armor types: leather, plate, and mail. The nodes in these trees are pretty much similar across them, with some differences. So in this case, for example, the book will have a node that the staff will not, and vice versa. But generally you have equivalency across the board. Crafting is a bit more complicated. We won't get into that right now, but just suffice it to say that for some things such as movement speed, the speed of the caravans there, the casting time for mounts, and even individual mounts, whether you can equip the swift mount or not, these are decisions that have to be made in this passive skill training tree, and they do impact your character customization to quite a degree. Next up, we are going to discuss race. Race is another big one decision you have to make at the very beginning. Now, the interface currently doesn't tell you much about the individual races in terms of their different attributes and the things that they unlock or enable. This is something I imagine they will fix in the future. For now, you have to use out-of-game resources or simply create it and check it out yourself. Race controls, of course, which class you can choose, which base class. So here you can be a Ganetian cleric or a Ganetian knight or a Ganetian duelist, and these are three very different platforms for building your character. Not all races can choose all classes. This is largely due to animation types and the work involved in creating those. They may eventually add others in the future, but for now this is what we got. And of course, race allows you to customize your appearance. Now here I'll show you an example of what it looks like when you have a different race and the abilities it can grant. The first major difference is in stats, the attributes that you have: strength, dexterity, intellect, and so on. These will determine your caps in those stats as well, and how high you can go. They also grant individual special passives for some races, and in some cases these are actual abilities, such as the burrow for the Ganetian, which is a kind of stealth which allows you to move underground. This is very important in some areas of gameplay because these relate to other choices you make further down the line, things that you can only choose if you are a particular race. The big decisions here have to be made very carefully, because not only does it determine the individual powers and abilities you have, but because of the attributes, it determines how good you are at certain things. So for example, if you want to be let's say a skinner, the Minotaur gets a particular bonus to skinning. Certain races get particular bonuses to crafting, and these are decisions that you want to make correctly. There's no real way to re-roll, you just have to start over, so you don't want to make mistakes. Here you see one assassin which was a high elf, which had certain powers and attributes, and this half elf has a different set. So for example, the half elf race gets the ability to slot 4 minor discipline runes in addition to these passives that you see here. That's given that these runes now can in some cases grant individual abilities or passives of their own. That's a pretty powerful choice. They have some other attributes which can be used to synergize with your further decisions, the class and promotion decisions, which you're going to be seeing soon, and those will really help you, support or balance out a particular character that you've chosen. Race is pretty huge. Next up, you have the base classes. There are currently 11 base classes. There are 12 races, and I imagine it would be nice to have some balance, or it would seem symmetrical to have 12 base classes as well. Maybe they'll get there, I don't know. But race, as you see here, will limit what base classes you could choose. The base classes themselves grant you the talent trees, and these are the powers and abilities that you have. Talent trees are unique in most cases to the individual classes. There are some powers which you can find in multiple classes, and sometimes you can get class-specific powers on disciplines, but generally speaking, these are unique. One interesting thing about these talents, these powers granted through your talent tree, is that you can make further decisions down the line which change their effects. They buff them or add additional secondary or third effects to them. There are 15 total talent points that you have to choose, and that leads you into the promotion class. Now you can see here some of these enhancements, as they're called, to powers you already have granted through the talents will change. So you can add effects to existing powers. You can also change the nature of them entirely. It also grants you access to different weapon types or armor types. The promotion class is a really key area of character customization because it unlocks abilities that you cannot find elsewhere and enhances abilities granted through other means. It's a huge part of that. The promotion classes currently are something that we're doing a lot of testing on. One thing to note is that a lot of this stuff is new. The addition of domains and whatnot in 6.2 has opened up quite a bit of new combinations, and these are being balanced. Every couple of days there's a patch, things are being tweaked, and I expect that will continue for the foreseeable future. That leads us directly into one of the biggest bits of new content, which is the domains. Now, there are 15 domains. Each class, a promotion class, gets access to between 3 and 6, or actually 4 and 6. You have to make that decision once you promote to your promotion class, as that will determine what runes you have access to. The various runes, they pertain both to the major runes and the minor runes, and you'll see here that these are categorized, in some cases the runes themselves are available in multiple groups, so you might find something that's available in both death and wind, for example. So these choices don't necessarily lock you out completely to certain things, you just have to pay attention to them. But disciplines are a huge part of the customization process. There are nearly 200 different disciplines combining majors and minors, spread throughout the 15 domains. Some of these, as you can see, are tied to a particular class or race. So regardless of your domain choice, if you are a particular class or race, you can access a certain domain, or rather certain disciplines. This can result in some really interesting builds. The customization here is quite extensive. Again, we're still going through all of these things. You find all kinds of builds which are not good at all, and others which seem to be overpowered. In this particular case, the half-elf platform is really good because you get the 4th minor option. Now, this is a really interesting example of the power of this system. So the half-elf has specific minor runes that only it can equip, which modify certain stats such as a range, distance bonus, and the farsight. Now, this allows you in some cases to modify the attributes of multiple powers. So you can have many attacks which will benefit from the increase. The same is the case with the Ganetian, who does the tunneling. This tunnel minor gives you abilities to your burrowing, which nobody else has access to. So this system is really flexible. There you saw the meditation, which gives you a way to refresh your stam. Now these runes currently drop off of thralls in the world. They drop in the form of knowledge for the majors, and they drop as runes for the minors. One other thing about these runes is that they come in different qualities like everything else, all other gear, ranging from white to legendary, and depending on their quality they may have additional stats on them. Next up in the category of customization, we have gear. Gear has stats. The stats can be highly customizable. Depending on what you craft something from, it will determine what stats you have, so different materials and different properties. This can apply to weapons, armor, jewelry, even the vessel itself. The vessel itself is a type of gear, so this can dictate not only mitigation types, but penetration types for damage. Sometimes you can add additional effects, add to attributes and so on. The gear possibilities are pretty extensive. And again, you have to look at the system in its entirety, combining all of these things. Sometimes people look at a particular number, a numerical value, and they think it's small, but the system takes into account the fact that you can contribute to it from so many different ways. One of those is your stats or attributes, which are your things like intellect, strength, and dexterity. These translate into particular things like hit points and stamina, and can be buffed in many different ways. Speaking of buffs is the last category of modifiers and customization. There's a lot of new food that can buff all kinds of combat, crafting, and exploration attributes. These are things which, again, we're still discovering. The recipes are available online in some cases, but not all of them, I don't think, have been found out. Another huge element of the buff part of the game is when you own a keep, you can build individual structures which will grant you specific buffs based on the structure type. So you have shrines, for example, which give you these persistent buffs. These are the same buffs which you can find in the world through the deity-based outposts. The deities or deities, there are 12 of them. They're grouped into 3 pantheons. You can have one from each pantheon at any one time. These will do things such as buff to your damage type, buffing to a particular power, etc. Now when you're building a city, or a keep rather, you have to decide in advance which buffs you're going to want access to, depending on what kind of force you field and so on. This is a choice because you can't build everything. So here you see the different types of deeds that you use to build the different buildings, and you can see the buff types available there once you rank those up. Again, these are tough decisions you have to make. In some cases you will only own one keep, maybe 2, and you're not going to be able to have everything, and you have to decide, am I more a PvP focused group, am I more of a harvesting focused group, or crafting, and you're going to want to support those things with the appropriate buffs. Again, the customization goes not just to the character, but all the way to the cities, so the keeps and so on that you build, and they all tie together. You have to make these decisions keeping the whole system in mind, and that's true of any evaluation of how much customization is in the game as well. I see a lot of people expressing disappointment with 6.2, comparing it to Shadowbane favorably or not, saying, there's not as much customization. It's really comparing apples and oranges. The games are similar in some ways, but they're also very different. And the customization, if you look at all levels of the game, really is there. But you have to consider everything. And one of those considerations is at the scale of the campaign world, the dregs as we call it. You see here these god outposts, and these individual outposts will grant you specific buffs to particular things. So if you are, say, an assassin that uses poison, you're going to want the Zelina buff, and so on. And this plays out, in what you do in game. You actually have to actively control those outposts to benefit from those buffs. Or if you have a keep, you can, of course, build the shrine in your particular keep and access them as well. And that is a tough decision. You have a limited number of plots in the actual world. You can see here in the keep, they're labeled with letters, different classes. Buildings are grouped according to building class types, and you have a limited number of each type. So you have to choose, do I want a barracks, do I want an armory, do I want an arcane armory, which buffs am I going to forego, and how am I going to build out my overall force. Are we melee heavy? Are we ranged heavy? There are debuffs as well through the sentinels, and that's a consideration you have to keep in mind. The customization really never ends. So I'm going to finish off here with an example of an assassin that shows how some of this customization plays together. This is a build which benefits from different ways of applying bleeds and the ability to get lifesteal on bleeding targets. Lifesteal is something which is limited to particular classes, although it has many ways to buff it, including gear, but you have to have it first. So by choosing particular talents, promotions, these major disciplines you see, Blood Feeder and Blade Master, I'm able to acquire individual powers which have some way of benefiting from a target being bled. The bleeding mechanics have changed slightly over time. Just recently, there are no longer different types of bleeds, they're all the same type. So if a target is bleeding and you apply another bleed, it will simply extend the duration. So these are, in this state of the game, the beta state, there are changes being made all the time. So a lot of this, is in flux, but generally, it is true that the customization you're capable of doing in this game is extensive. It really just takes a lot of time to explore it all and find out what works and what doesn't work, not only for yourself, but in the context of your group. So I hope this has been helpful. These things, as I said, are changing, so perhaps I will revisit this topic in the future. But for the time being, this has been an overview of the character customization possible in Crowfall. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you are enjoying the game as it stands right now. We've seen a huge increase in population, and I hope that continues. And as always, thanks for watching.